want to welcome you to our program today. Our special guest is Joe Potosi. Joe, thank you for being on today.
Thank you.
And one of the things that Joe has done is that he's written a book, and the book is entitled When the Dust Settled, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And so this book is about Joe's struggle and difficulty as he was growing up in a very abusive situation, but to talk about how he coped in bad ways, but then how he learned to cope in godly ways, ways that have been good and beneficial to him. But he's now been able to take all of what God has blessed him with and all of these experiences, and to be able to write a real good book that certainly will be helpful to others as well. Yeah, so as we get started, Joe, just to share a little bit about this. You obviously very inspired by God to write this book.
Yes.
And so it started, off as a child, growing up in a very abusive home.
Yes.
And I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through that, but why don't you just share a little bit about your journey?
Okay, Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was around the age of 3 when my mother and my father were accepted into a local housing projects in Rockford, Illinois. And the apartment we had lived in prior to that was dilapidated. And so for us, it was a step up. Do you remember the Jeffersons?
Yes.
Moving on up? For us, it was moving up. And I don't remember a whole lot other than the fact that I knew I was loved. Especially my father would show affection toward me and my sister. And before we moved, my mother had her 3rd child, my brother Marty. We moved to the projects, and they both liked to drink alcohol. But once we got moved into this new neighborhood, all these people, so-called friends, I would call them, began to hang out with my mother and father, and the drinking intensified, and my dad would stay away for long periods of time. And one of the guys that would come around was this guy named Tyrone. And then on one particular day, my dad came home. I hadn't seen him for like a week, grabbed all his belongings, and he left. He left out the front door, and later that day, this man, Tyrone, who would eventually become my stepfather, came in the back door. I would describe my family as one of, a loving, nurturing mother and father. That all changed in a very rapid period of time.
And so you'd say that alcohol had a lot to do with the change in your parents?
Absolutely, and marijuana and other drugs.
Okay.
And me and my sister, who was 13 months my senior, really had to fend for ourselves and our younger brothers. My mom would work different jobs through labor ready or temp services, usually 2nd or 3rd shift. My stepdad didn't work, but he always seemed to have money for alcohol and booze or and drugs, and he would, on a daily basis, tell me how much he hated me because I looked like my father, I talked like my father, and it was a thorn in his side, as he would put it. And over the process of time, my stepfather would beat my mother. They would get drunk, high, and he would beat her to a bloody pulp. My stepdad got to be the size of 350 pounds, 6'5". My mom was only 4'11". But out of sight, out of mind. And what I mean by that was, typically my mom would be at work, my stepdad would be at the house, but he would send us to the basement where he would lock us down there for hours on end until he felt fit to let us up for dinner, or if we were allowed to play outside, he'd let us out. So when I started school, I found a release. It was like something I looked forward to. Most of the kids that I hung around took their time getting to school. They literally would drag their feet. Not me. I would sometimes run to school because at least there I felt safe I felt like I was learning something. There was structure, there was stability.
It was a place of refuge and
yes,
a safe place.
Yes. So after my second or third year in school, I discovered a local church, Zion Lutheran Church in Rockford, Illinois, had an after-school program. And my mom gave me and my sister permission to go to this club. And there were two ladies, Mary and Helen. One was paid staff, the other was just a volunteer. They just invested in me and the other kids. They shared the story of Jesus Christ and who and what he did for mankind. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I couldn't trust my father. He abandoned the family. Mm-hmm. I couldn't trust my mother, who I loved dearly, or my stepdad. How can I trust in this God I can't see, feel, or touch? But I continued to go to church because it was positive. It was impactful. I loved the environment. So fast forward a little bit to third grade. Now by this time, there was a lot of physical abuse. My stepfather had a wooden paddle. He had drilled holes in. And when he was going to dish out punishment, I was usually his target for a variety of reasons that didn't make much sense. And usually it was a spectacle. And what I mean by that was he would come down to the basement, have me pull my pants down and bend over the stairs while he would be, explaining why I'm getting a whooping. And other kids were sitting around watching. And it wasn't like a slap on the butt. It was grab me by my arm, hold me in the air, and just wailing on me. Oh. And this pattern continued. And when he wasn't inflicting physical harm to me, my mother was. You see, the fact that my dad left was my fault. The fact that they were financially strapped was my fault. The fact that my stepfather would beat my mother was my fault. Mm-hmm. And I was walking on eggshells, and it was just, I couldn't understand. So in third grade, my stepfather didn't work. My mom was working extremely hard to get food in the house. I decided I need to find a job. So there was a local greasy spoon in the neighborhood called the Sandwich Factory, and I asked him for a job. The owner gave me a job sweeping the parking lots on Saturdays, cleaning the glass, etc. He said to me that, this is not your responsibility. You don't have to feel like compelled to support your family. And I have to. Mm-hmm. My dad is gone. My mom is working. There's 6 children. I have to do something to make a difference. And ever since my stepfather came onto the scene, he promised to get us out of the projects. I never believed him, but he did, or they did. And we moved to the west side of Rockford, which was a pretty rough area, but it was a different school, different neighborhood, different kids, etc. And I tried the best I could to fit in. But I figured, now that we're in the different neighborhood, we're in an actual house, a fresh start. With my stepfather, I'm going to try my very best to do my very best so they would get along. Mm-hmm. They would treat me like a human. So going into 5th grade, I'm in a new school. And by the way, there was a few summers where I was allowed to go to Dubuque. Mm-hmm. That's where my mother and father are from, Dubuque, Iowa. And it was during those times I would see my dad. And going back to Rockford was extremely hard. I didn't understand why he couldn't come back and we can be reunited. Mm-hmm. I was crushed by that. So in 5th grade, I got a paper route because I still had this attitude that I need to support the family. I need to make some money. I had to deliver 188 papers during the week and 266 on the weekends, on Sundays. Mm-hmm. It was quite a bit. Oh, yeah. And the blizzard of 78, 79, mm-hmm. if you recall that, we got a lot of snow. And I picked up all these snow shoveling jobs with the people I delivered the paper to. And so I would give the money to my mom. And out of kindness, and I would go to the local drugstore, not unlike Hardix or Walgreens here in town, and I would buy her like a coffee mug. She loved instant coffee. And I'll buy my stepfather his favorite candy, trying to buy their affection. That didn't make a difference. A pattern developed where he would take my money, or he would insist that she'll take my money to help pay the bills. Well, I got tired of that, so I quit the paper route. And on one Saturday night, my brothers were staying with their grandmother. My sister wasn't around. My mom was working. I woke up to the music upstairs blaring. So I go up there and I see my stepdad at the kitchen table. He has all these newspapers spread out and he's furiously cleaning his .38 caliber handgun. And I sheepishly asked him if he can turn the music down. And he ordered that I have a seat at the table. So I sit down. He turns the music off, comes back, and he continues to put his gun back together. And he asks, why did you quit the paper route? I didn't have an answer. At this point, I'm looking at the ground. I'm scared. Mm-hmm. And I glance up and look at him as he's putting the bullets back in the chamber. And he goes, give me one reason why I shouldn't pull the trigger. And then within a flash, he click, pulled the trigger. I instantly peed my pants as I ran downstairs, afraid for my life, and I jumped behind the furnace. I was walking on eggshells for years, but now it just intensified. So this was the pattern. This was my life. I wasn't the only one treated poorly. My sister was treated extremely bad, as well as my brother Greg. But I was that daily reminder of my father. And there would be times my mom would put me on the phone and my stepdad would get on the other phone in the kitchen or the bedroom, and they would call my grandparents asking them to take me because they don't want me. They were going to throw me away. So fast forward, I just finished 7th grade. My mother was allowing me to come to Dubuque, but she said, pack all of your clothes because you're not coming back. She didn't tell me what was going on. So I come to Dubuque, I go to my paternal grandparents' house, and she calls me a week or so later and says, I need you to find us an apartment. I'm leaving Tyrone. And here I am. I just finished 7th grade, just a little kid. She put this on me. So I'm calling all these landlords every day. If you remember, Dubuque had 2 newspapers every day, a morning and evening newspaper. And my grandmother said, no one's going to believe you. You're just a child. They think it's a prank. I had to try. I found us an apartment on 25th and Central. My mom moved up, but my 2 youngest brothers, the children she had to my stepfather, she couldn't bring them. And I was crushed by that. I started 8th grade at Jefferson Junior High School, and basically I was flunking 8th grade because not only is my dad long gone, out of the picture, and by the way, I longed for him to come back. Do you remember the Lone Ranger? He'd come and take care of the bad guys and set everything straight. Yeah. I used to imagine he'll come around the next corner and save us, rescue us. I mean, it was so sad. I would dream I could fly. I would fly to Dubuque and fly home before school started the next day. That's how much I longed for him. Anyway, lost my train of thought.
Yes.
So we find the apartment on Central. My mom moves up with my 3 siblings, and my dad's out of the picture. Now we're away from Tyrone. Things got to get better with my mom. Things are going to be the way they were. They weren't. Her drinking intensified. She would have relationships with these guys, just random people. And things were really, really bad. So she applied to get in. Dubuque has a project, housing projects called Sheridan Village. We got accepted into the housing projects, but a few months later, we got evicted because she would get drunk, go down and fight with the neighbors, cuss people out. She was like a real bully on the block, I guess. We got evicted. We had nowhere to go. We went back to Rockford, back to Tyrone. And it was extremely tough. And he started telling his sons, my 2 youngest brothers, that he's getting rid of all the white kids, the white boys. He's going to send me and my 2 white brothers to a foster home. He's going to get rid of us. So one Sunday, we were at church, and my brother Greg said, you know what, man, we should just run away. Let's run away to Dubuque. December 1981. We walked from Auburn and Kilburn all the way out to the state police station in Pecatonica. Now, I don't know if you know where Rockford, Illinois is, Highway 20.
Yep.
From there to the state police station is like 18 miles.
Okay.
But in December, we weren't dressed for it. We had no water, no food. We thought we can get to Dubuque. By the time we got to the state police station, we decided to turn ourselves in. We were wore out, you know. We realized we're not going to make it to Dubuque. But all I can picture is my grandmother's porch with the light on, beckoning me to come. So the next day, he put us in juvenile, trying to teach us a lesson, which was really, it didn't faze me. And at that time, I was on a wrestling team. But because we ran away, he decided I could no longer wrestle. And that devastated me because that was something I really loved. I had played football and baseball when I was younger, but wrestling was something I really enjoyed. So, you know, things continued to spiral out of control with my mom and my stepdad. The following year, December, I was in 10th grade, once again on the wrestling team. I got the head coach came and got me and said, you need to get home. Something's going on with your mom. And I didn't mention this before, but ever since I was in around 5th grade, she goes, don't be surprised if you get called out of school, if you get pulled out because we're leaving him. So that's all I kept thinking. You know, I run home. He's there, Tyrone. We all have dinner together. And as soon as he leaves, she calls the police. They come and get us. We go to the battered women's shelter. We stayed there for about 2 months, thereabouts. And we began going to a different church, and this church had some rental property. They allowed us to rent out one of their apartments. So we're away from Tyrone. I gave up on my dad. Things got to get better with my mother, right? I mean, logically speaking, it's going to get better. They didn't. They continued to get worse and worse and worse. So, short story, I was working at the projects I used to live in for the maintenance department, painting the wooden cubicles, and I would see my step-grandmother almost on a daily basis, and I would see my stepdad's car, and I knew he was around. Things had gotten so bad with my mother, I actually approached him and asked him if I can live with him. This is the man that hates me, but I am so desperate.
To live with Tyrone.
Tyrone. I approached Tyrone and I said, things are really, really bad. Do you think I can live with you? His own sons don't live with him. He just laughed in my face and walked away. And that's when I realized I need to make a decision. I have to do something with my life because I can't continue like this. So I decided to join the Navy. I was on delayed entry for 363 days. And I would babysit for the recruiter, and we became good friends. And I just couldn't wait for that day. And I was not an honor roll student in high school. I was not the brightest kid. However, I worked at it so I can graduate a semester early. The summer of '84, you know, I'm all ready to go into the Navy the following January of '85. My mom throws a monkey wrench into my plan. We're going back to Dubuque to live. So all 6 of us kids and my mom moved back to Dubuque. We moved onto 13th and Elm Street. But there was a major hiccup. Iowa wouldn't accept many of my credits. Hempstead and Senior said, you can't come here for only a semester. It's got to be a year. I ended up going to Central High School. I only needed 2 credits to graduate. And I began going to the YMCA to lift weights and just better condition myself for the Navy. At which time I met a priest. At the time I didn't know he was a priest, but he was my workout partner. He was a priest at St. Mary's. And ever since I was a young boy, my grandmother wanted us she practiced Catholicism her life. She wanted me to go through all the classes, etc. And so I went through that process: catechism, confession, communion, and I did it for them, not for me. I wanted to make them happy. So things continued to deteriorate at home, so I would spend my time at the Y, or I'd go jog all over Dubuque. I'd just run to 32nd Street or up at Heritage Pond, wherever I could, just to get away. It was a good stress release. But my dad was back in Dubuque, but he was living in the rescue mission. He was a helpless, hopeless alcoholic. And he would come around to see his kids, but he would always be drunk. And I would make him leave. And I couldn't understand. So his sister, one particular night, I have all this resentment and anger toward him. She sat me down and explained in detail the situation. The fact that my mother was having an affair, and the fact that he had some roadblocks and he had some setbacks as a young child, and so he wasn't necessarily playing with the full deck, so to speak. So once she shared this, it was like a yearbook. And this yearbook was a picture of my dad smiling ear to ear with a bunch of these men. And it was at a rescue mission in Denver, Colorado. And he was so happy and content. Long story short, I fully understood the issues with my dad, and I found the ability to forgive him. And I always loved him, but I had these issues. So I finished the last few months before I went to the Navy, just trying to stay busy, trying to invest in my kid brothers' lives, instill in them the qualities that are so important. And I was still active in church, but I still have not put my trust in Christ. I go through the motions, but I still have this trust issue. So the day I go into the Navy, or leave for the Navy, my mom comes out on the front stoop as I get on the city bus to go catch the Greyhound, and she's hollering from the top of her lungs, "You're never going to make it into boot camp. You're a loser like your father, and just remember, you can't come back here to live." Her face was contorted as she screamed, and I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed for her, and I was worried for my brothers. So I go into the Navy. And boot camp for me was really easy. I mean, it was physical. They break you down mentally to build you back up. I was so broken, they couldn't break me any further. I had no ego. I had no, preconceived ideas that I'm better than this or whatever. It was extremely easy. So I get through boot camp. I go to school in Memphis, Tennessee. Then I get stationed in San Diego. And you can imagine I wanted to, make friends and etc. And for years, I was always looking for acceptance. Like I wanted to belong to something. And I started associating with a lot of guys, but the common theme was alcohol. They all like to drink. And I found myself during my naval career turning to alcohol to try to lessen the pain, the emotional scars, the baggage, the resentment, the anger that I was carrying. And by the grace of God, I was able to get out of the Navy with honorable discharge, came back to Rockford, Illinois, but the cycle continued because I was angry at my mother and my stepfather. I had unforgiveness in my heart. And in 1994, I got laid off from my job, and my father, by this point, was in Rockford, and he suggested I move to Dubuque, which I took his advice. Everybody else said, don't go to Dubuque. But I came to Dubuque, I met my wife a month after being here, and we got married in September of 1996. And the following April of 97, I was at Dubuque Bible Church, and I heard the gospel clearly. Now, I had heard it hundreds of times, but that day, I fully heard the message, and I put my trust in Christ. And I got extremely involved with ministry over the period of time. Then the following year, found out we're going to be parents, and everything come rushing back. Everything came rushing back. The memories, the beatings, the abuse, the psychological, everything rushed like a flood. And I began to have these dreams and nightmares of what I went through. And I was so afraid of becoming a father because all I knew was how they interacted with me, how they beat us, how they treated us like animals or worse. And I still had this anger and resentment toward both my mother and my stepfather. The Holy Spirit kept telling me, listen, I have forgiven you. Who are you not to forgive? And I was able to finally and completely and utterly forgive, release that anger, that resentment.
Yeah, and so that was, really kind of a turning point then in your life, to be able to let go and trust God and to forgive. And this big past that you've had, it just seems insurmountable as far as all of the pain and what you've had to carry. And so with your book, then you kind of share about that, then.
Yes.
Your journey and how you came to finally trusting God to forgive, and how that released you.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just say something real quick?
Yes.
Okay. For those out there that have been through a similar situation, there's an epidemic in our country called suicide. Maybe you feel like you're not worthy, or you don't deserve to live, or you don't deserve to be a part of a family. I want to tell you that you are worthy, and you have value, and you have significance, and that God has a plan for you in your life. I just pray that you would turn to Him. Because if it wouldn't have been for God in my life, I would either be locked up or buried up.
Yeah, the power of God. This has been quite a testimony of you going through, a very abusive situation here, environment in your family, but how God has taken you and has claimed you, and that you were able to forgive, and you have found value and worth in God and what you're doing now in ministering to others. And here again, Joe has written this book, When the Dust Settled, and you can purchase this book on Amazon.com, also Barnes & Nobles, and there's a few other places around too that you can purchase the book, can't you? Or?
Yes, River Lights in Dubuque, Iowa, and Zulon Press.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been very powerful.
Thank you.
And hopeful, and hopefully you can bring a lot of courage and healing and meaning to all of our lives.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us this day as well.